Just a few weeks ago, I received a phone call from my oldest brother informing me that our mother had suddenly and unexpectedly passed away. She was 78 years old and was living in Tucson, Arizona, which is where my middle brother lives full time. And, she was seemingly in pretty good health, but for that day, she'd kind of had a bad day. She'd gotten choked on a pill and she had some residual effects from that, but had this underlying chest pain that probably got hidden by the effects from the choking. My mom had suffered a cardiac arrest, and even though the ER docs tried several times to revive her, she just didn't come back. I have now lost both of my parents in the last 5 years, and both of them kind of the same way. Both were seemingly in good health, and they both suffered from cardiac arrest. When you have a situation like this happen, it's literally like having your parents taken away in a split second, in a blink of an eye. They're here 1 minute and they're literally gone the next. I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye to either one of them. I didn't even get a chance to reply to the text message that my mom had sent to me on that same day. And when something like this happens, when someone is taken away from you so suddenly, it can definitely leave you at a complete loss for words and feeling like you're swimming in a deep sea of emotion. Death is an interesting thing. It's probably the biggest, and in my mind, it is the biggest mystery that we as human beings face on a daily basis. It's really strange. And if after the initial loss of someone in your life, there comes this thing that I kind of call the weird factor that comes into play. And it comes into play mainly because someone was there 1 minute and now they're gone. And that weird factor is the void that's left over. You can't, talk with them anymore. You can't see them anymore. You can't laugh or do life with them anymore because they're simply gone. They're not here. And that weird factor comes in because of that void, and it leaves you with these impulses. I get these impulses every once in a while of you know what, I probably should call my mom, or let me text these pictures to her. And then after that split second impulse, the split second response is, wait a minute, I can't do that because they're not here anymore. We all lose someone, and then we all experience that weird factor. And we all try to console one another when we're going through the weird factor to help each other kind of get a grasp on what is going on. And we say things like this, that, death is just like birth. It's just a natural part of life. And that sounds consoling. Problem is, it's not right. Death is a part of life. That's for sure, the life we experience now. And it is a certainty, but it's not natural. It's not natural mainly because it's not a part of the original blueprint that God had in mind when he created human beings. Human beings were not meant to experience death. In the book of Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible, we've got two chapters that are side by side. They're right next to one another. And we might just kind of assume that they are very similar. They just go completely together. But the reality is they couldn't be more opposite from one another. There's an event that takes place that creates this opposite effect in both chapters 2 and chapter 3. In chapter 2, God, we see him there forming man. He's going to create man. And he basically takes the dirt of the ground and he kind of takes the dirt and forms like a body. And then he goes and breathes his breath into the body, which is his spirit. And then it says that he becomes a being. And in the Hebrew, the word there is more along the lines of whole, or we might say complete or perfect. So there we have a man, the first creature that's created, the first human being that's created. And God also says, hey, we're going to give you some pets. And we're going to create these animals around you that you can name. And they're friendly. They're like your pets. They're just like your companions so that you won't get lonely. And then God goes and creates this incredible, we call it the Garden of Eden. And the word paradise literally means the garden of the king. It's like paradise, right? The garden of the king. But it's really probably more along the lines of an orchard, because there are trees all over. And the trees not only give off beauty, but they have fruit. And they bear fruit like all the time that you can eat anytime, whenever you want. And it's right there. And so this incredible orchard is created, and God puts a river flowing right in the middle of it, so that it nourishes this orchard at all times, so that the orchard can continuously give off fruit and be healthy. And the first man, Adam, is going to go through and kind of take care of it, and he's got his pets to be there with him, and this is a pretty good deal. But the piece de resistance that God has in mind is he's going to create the ultimate companion for Adam, and that obviously we know is woman, and her name was Eve. And so God takes the rib from Adam and he forms Eve, and all of a sudden now we've got two human beings, and we've got pets, and we've got these beautiful trees, and we've got an incredible river, and it's beautiful, and there's fruit and food to eat whenever you want. These guys have basically got it made in the shade, and we're all always envious of them because they've got a pretty good deal. And God said, hey, listen, this is going to be great, and there's only one rule, and we obviously know what that rule is. There's one tree that has fruit. Just don't touch it. Definitely don't eat it. Just kind of leave it alone. If we can do that, then everything should be pretty good. And God does look at it as good or whole or complete or perfect. Unfortunately, here comes chapter 3. So in chapter 3, man and woman all of a sudden see this serpent or snake, whatever, and the snake puts a fast one over on them, and he tells them a lie. He tricks them into eating the fruit, breaking the one rule that they had. They broke the rule, and everything changed from there. They suddenly realized that they were naked, and the first impulse they had was to run and go make clothes for themselves. And then they also realized that the pet animals, they're not friendly anymore. And they're not tame. They're kind of wild. I can't go and pet them anymore. And then they're also kicked out of the garden/orchard. And they realize that the trees on the outside, they don't give off fruit like the trees in the garden did. Matter of fact, we're going to have to work from now on, and work very, very hard to get our food. They're going to experience things they've never experienced before, like pain and struggle. And ultimately, they're going to experience loss, and loss in the form of guilt and shame and fear, and also in failure, which is what we call sin. And the culmination of that loss is going to be felt through death. They won't be living forever anymore. Now they are branded with an expiration date, something that we as human beings will have to struggle with from now on throughout the history of mankind and humankind on this planet. And it will be weird and seem weird for sure. So the reality is that death became a part of our story. It wasn't a part of the original blueprint, but it did become a part of our story. And it is a certainty for all of us, but it's not natural. It's not natural because that's not the way it was intended to be. Now, if this was the end of the story, it'd be a pretty sad story, and we all might walk away from this talk a little depressed, for sure. But the reality is that this is not the end of the story. There was a big part of the story that we left out, and because we haven't really gotten to it yet, and that part is called reconciliation. Reconciliation is what God is absolutely about. It's what he is currently totally involved in. He has created a mission, and he is on mission about restoring and renewing and reuniting all of creation. He is reconciling all of creation back to the way that it was meant to be. He's reconciling us, going back to the original blueprint, which means no more death. 2 Corinthians 5 says this: "So then, if anyone is united with the Messiah, God's chosen one. He or she is a new creation. What is old has passed away. It's gone. But look, what is new is now here. And all of these things are from God, who reunited us to himself through the Messiah, and who has given us the task of reconciliation. In other words, through his chosen one, God was reconciling the whole world to himself, setting things right, not counting people's failures against them. And he has given us the exact same message and task of reconciliation. God's top priority right now is reconciliation. It's his top priority. It's what he spends all of his time on. He is getting creation, which includes all of us, back to where it's supposed to be. And for us, that is really good news. I mean, it's great news. It's what we call gospel, because the word gospel means good news. And it is. It's really good. It is the gospel in its core. I mean, can you imagine not having death loom over our heads for our whole lives? Can you imagine never having to experience that weird factor from the loss of someone who's gone? I mean, that sounds pretty good to me right now. So our future isn't surrounded by, going to heaven and spending eternity in heaven with God in his celestial city and the awesome mansion that he's going to build. And we're floating around with harps and on wings. That's not our future. Our future is surrounded by the idea of getting back to Eden, which is fantastic because that means no more loss, no more death, and all the other forms that come with loss. No more guilt and shame and fear, and no more failure. And all of this is done because God has chosen to forgive and forget, to completely wipe the slate clean, which for us is incredible news. It's that gospel. It's good news. But we can't overlook the second part of that 2 Corinthians scripture that I just read for you, which is that God is reconciling us so that we can live a life of reconciliation. So God reconciles us so that we can be reconciled with him and be right, but he's also wanting us to go and live lives of reconciliation to the people around us. We're supposed to go and spread this good news, right? And a lot of times we think that we just spread it by our mouths. We just go and preach the gospel, or we go and teach the gospel, or tell the gospel. But the reality is that our actions speak way louder than words. God is reconciling us, and we therefore should go and reconcile with others. The idea of being whole again with God and with creation and with others has to start somewhere. And where that starts is right here. Us allowing God to make things right, first and foremost, right here within us, in our hearts and in our minds. And then that kind of spills out of us in like a response to the people that we come in contact with every day. And that whole idea, that system is pretty great. It's pretty awesome. It's great news. God's reconciling us so that we reconcile others. It's actually too great not to allow it to completely change us from the inside out. And it's also too great not to go and share with others, specifically in the ways that we treat other people. Death, unfortunately, is something that we have to experience in our life right now, for now. But it's not a part of our future if we're being reunited with God, if he is reconciling us, and then in turn we are reconciling with others. I think that our future actually is pretty darn bright because it involves a whole and complete and perfect life, a life without death.